Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. Good late morning, listeners. It is a sunny, beautiful day here in suburban Chicago. We're in the middle of June, halfway through the month, and it is just lovely. What a wonderful day for a walk. Happy to be talking with you today, and I'm in good spirits because last night was the first meeting of my game club, Toggle Gaming, which has begun to meet again after 15 months of hiatus, and boy, was it fun to see all my friends again. We were a little worried that, having been gone 15 months, we would have a paucity of members attending, that we would be light. No. Our average back in the heyday of the club was between 50 and 100 members on any given Tuesday. And we had, by rough counts, between 70 and 80 people, possibly more. So it was a good turnout. In fact, we felt a little bad because we had estimated to the establishment that we thought probably 30 people would show, and so they were understaffed, which was too bad, but good, ultimately good, because it was sort of just like we had just paused. A year and 3 months had gone by, and then we started up again. Most of the people who I could have normally expected to see on a Tuesday night were there. It was fantastic. So, boy, that was great. And it was my birthday, so what a nice birthday present. On a sad note, those of you who've been following the podcast know that I was working with XYZ Game Labs on a recent Kickstarter project, and that project has now been canceled. We got about a week into the project, and it was clear that it wasn't going to fund, and so it didn't make sense to continue the project and put all our time and energy into something that ultimately wasn't going to go where it needed it to go. So I'm hoping that we'll see some version of that project resurface again in future, but for now, it is not there. Thus, you can find yourselves relieved of my incompetent attempts at advertising and not have to put up with pitches for that anymore. For those of you who came out and supported the project, thank you very much. I really appreciate the participation. And on to the content of the day. So I've been thinking about what do I want to talk about today? What would be something fun to talk about? So for my birthday yesterday, a friend came over. We played some games. I got as a present a 3D printer. Ooh boy, that's gonna be a fun toy to play with. I'm gonna spend a little time this afternoon figuring out how it works, seeing if I can try it in the meantime. But we played a couple games. I played another round of Super Skill Pinball 4K'd, and we also played Everdell. And I really like Everdell. I've talked about it a number of times before. It's become a sort of favorite game for me. And the play with one of the people playing with us, it was his first time playing, so it was fun to get to do that with him. But as we were playing, we thought of a few things, and I realized I haven't done sort of a cultural critical conversation about Everdell yet, so I thought that might be fun. I don't have a snazzy name for this, but let's just call it Thinking Through the Society of Everdell. For those of you who haven't played Everdell, it is a worker placement tableau building game in which you are developing a city of anthropomorphized animals living under a magical tree. In the game, you can do constructions, which are buildings, and you can have critters, which are animals, in your tableau. You are limited pretty strictly by the game to 15 cards in your tableau. There are a couple cards that break those rules, but for the most part, that's how it works. And over the course of the game, you're slowly building up that tableau, and the cards in the tableau do different things for you. Some of them will give you immediate one-time bonuses. Some of them will give you a bonus that you get a couple times, depending when you get those cards. And some of them give you points or additional actions that you can take. Those are sort of the 4 different kinds of cards that you have in the game. Oh, there's a 5th kind that give you ongoing benefits as well. So there's one-time benefits, ongoing benefits, benefits that trigger 2 or 3 or 4 times depending how you use them, and then point scoring cards. Those are sort of the different options, and cards that give you extra actions. But all of the cards are themed around sort of late medieval, early Renaissance ideas of what a town might be. You know, one really good way to think about the game is if you're familiar with the fictional property or the fictional world of Redwall, this society fits in really well with that. Narratively, it feels a lot like the Renaissance era, except all the people living in the town are animals. So one of the things that happens in the game is when you build a construction, there's this little additional bonus that you can get for construction, which is that you can get a free critter of the matching type. So if you build a cemetery, you can, for free on a future turn, get the critter Undertaker to come to your town. Similarly, if you build the lookout tower, you can get a wanderer, and if you build a dungeon, you can get a ranger, and so on. And a lot of these creatures, some of them do something on their own, but some of them will provide a benefit that helps something else. So what I wanted to talk about were a few of the sort of narrative shapes that emerge between the art, the names of cards, and the mechanisms that occur when those cards appear. And I thought that would be an interesting way to think through the story of the game. The first one I wanted to think about came about because of a couple narrative moments that we had in the game. So one thing you can do is you can get a post office. And if you get the post office, that allows you to get more cards. So the cards are one of the ways that you're able to do stuff in the game. So getting a post office allows you to get rid of some cards and get more cards. So you think of it as moving around information. There's also a postal pigeon who is the postal carrier for the post office. And that one allows you to draw more cards as well. So the post office and the post office related figures let you draw more cards, which then give you access to more of these things. But interestingly, these are very low point scoring things. The post office itself, I think, was 1 point or 2 points. And the postal pigeon is 0 points, which is particularly bad. Almost every card is worth at least 1 point. There are a few that are worth 0, and one of them is this postal pigeon. So that card is particularly odious to have in your board, because like I said, you're limited to 15. So narratively, there's one card that you can get in the game that allows you to remove other cards, and that is the dungeon. So if you have the dungeon lets you take another card and put it under the dungeon card. It lets you take a critter and put it under the dungeon, and when you do that, you get a bonus for building something else. Now, narratively, I'm not really sure what we get for that bonus, but the dungeon is an interesting element. Like, you free up some level of cultural capital by throwing troublemakers in the prison. And in particular, in our story, I threw the postal pigeon in the prison, which mechanically was good because then I free up the space where that postal pigeon, which was earning 0 points, was going to land, and I was able to put something else there instead. But remember, the postal pigeon is worth in doing that, I'm able to get some free resources and build something sooner. So it's sort of like the postal pigeon is going around causing trouble and distracting the resources of the kingdom by spreading these lies, and by putting them in the dungeon, then I cut off that message and I'm able to free up some resources. So I thought that was a funny development. One of the other things that's in the game that is an interesting bit of culture that I don't know. Okay, so one of the constructs in the game is you can get a farm, and when you get a farm, you can then get a free husband or wife. The farm is a tiny little house, and it gives you a berry, which is the main currency that you get critters with is berries. And the husband and wife are two different critter characters. The husband, I think he earns a berry as long as you have at least one farm. So if you have a farm, you get a berry, and if you have a husband, you're getting another berry as long as you already had a farm. Then the wife, she does not earn a berry. Instead, what she earns for you is 3 points at the end of the game, but only if she is paired with the husband. So then you have this weird dichotomy where the wife doesn't actually do anything in the game except earn points, which feels weird, especially in, Renaissance era. The wife working on the farm would have been doing a lot of work on that farm in the same way that the husband does. Now, like, mechanically, there's this nice twist where You get either the husband or wife for free once you have the farm, and then you have to obtain the other one the normal way, spending berries or whatnot. But then the husband and wife go on the same space in your tableau. So remember I mentioned you're only allowed to have 15 spaces on your tableau. Well, the husband and wife only take up one space. So there's this sort of benefit to having the husband and wife together on your tableau. But, there's a weird heteronormative, so not only is the weird sexist division of labor where the husband does productive labor and the wife literally just earns you points, just sits there. But also, you have to have a heterosexual couple in your game. Now, sure, maybe there's an argument for, in the Renaissance era, that would have been the pairing that would have been required. But this is an animal kingdom, right? This is a fantasy world. So any argument that you'd have toward realism is already out the window because it's a fantasy world. I guess you could make a similar argument that a female mouse and a male mouse would take up household together, that the alternate structures of the household wouldn't apply. But again, applying realism to a world where you've made up that creatures of all different species would live together in a society and they would have jobs and open shops and stuff, right? You're already in a fantasy world. So there's no reason that you have to use this heteronormative approach. I mean, one way to do it would be to say that just have them be a mouse couple, and the first mouse living in the farmhouse earns a berry, and the second one earns 3 points. I feel like that could be a reasonable way to approach the same problem and avoid the heteronormative argument that emerges. You could also just have art for three different mouse figures. That could be the husband, the wife, and then the spouse. And the spouse could be kind of depicted non-binary. And then whichever ones you choose to apply there would earn what they earn. But it's still the first mouse in a farm, the first mouse attached to a farm earns a berry, the second one earns 3 points or something like that. I would suspect that this isn't a conversation they had. They probably just narratively using the medieval metaphor of a farmstead where a husband and wife are farming the property together was the implication there, and there just wasn't a conversation about what it says to require that pairing be there. Another amusing element to me that emerges in the game is the Fool. Now, I got hit with the Fool at a really inopportune time. I had planned my game out precisely so that I would have 15 spots in my tableau, and I got those 15 spots by using the dungeon to remove the unwanted figures from my board, and another player waited until I had removed my second figure and then played the Fool into my tableau. Of course, the Fool loses you 2 points, so you don't want the Fool in your board. In addition, the Fool is a skunk, so they look bad, and they are worth negative points. So having done that to me after my dungeon was full meant that I couldn't do anything about it, and it was actually the last space in my tableau, so then couldn't play the card that I intended to play. Now, ironically, I ended up earning more points, or the same number of points, because of that betrayal as I would have with it. Because I was planning to play a card that was worth 2 points and would have gotten me an additional 1 point during the final scoring for a total of 3. Instead, because that was blocked, I then used my last worker to go to a different spot where I was able to earn 3 points. Now, of course, I still had the -2, so ultimately I did come out 2 points behind, but from a mechanical standpoint, it didn't really mess with me much. But I did want to talk about the Fool as an interesting choice, right? That the skunk is seen as the negative. You lose 2 points for having a skunk, the Fool, in your village. But skunks are only smelly to predators. They don't just smell bad all the time. So it's an interesting use of that particular figure as the one that people wouldn't want around. I also was amused by the implications of where the skunk comes from. Because the skunk, of course, you can buy it straight, as you always can with the critters. But the other way to get the skunk is to build the festival. Now the festival is another card that you can get in the game, and when you have the festival, that allows you to get the skunk for free, the fool. Which means that we have this weird thing where the fool is somebody, an entertainer, that the only entertainment you have is this festival, and the figure that comes out of it is the fool, and that figure costs you points. To me, that really ties, especially when you look at the husband and wife thing, that really ties the Renaissance era village that we're developing here to the kind of puritanical work ethic at the heart of how we talked about times of this era, right? That the entertainer is bad for your community because they waste time, presumably, or they're stinky. Either one is not a very nice idea. And so baked into the heart of Everdell is this idea that the productive people help you build things, and then the nice things score you points, and the time wasters don't. And so it's amusing to me that the fool, who is this entertainer, is one of the only cards in the game that actively makes you lose points, as opposed to, and it's also the only card you can give to someone else, which has an amusing part about it as well, right? The festival in the traditional medieval time was a time of rule breaking. It was a time of exuberance and excitement in which the rules of the village were overturned, and often the social structures that governed most of how people interacted were turned on their head, and so on. And so the interesting interplay in which you have a festival come to your town, and then you sort of send the results of that festival to someone else, feels like an interesting indictment of laziness and entertainment versus, studious hard work. I maybe am reading too much into it, but it feels like that's there. And I think it's interesting. It's also interesting that festivals, being the time when rules were broken in these traditional celebrations, also ended up being that you're able to send that rule breaker, that person who takes away 2 points, to someone else's game or someone else's tableau. This is one of the only times you can put a card in someone else's tableau. So really works well as fitting the narrative scope. If the goal is to convey this sort of medieval village along with the underlying ethical guidance of the medieval morality play, in which people, studiousness and hard work and obeying the rules were a key part of making society click. Which leads me to the last card or setup of the game that I wanted to talk about, and that is the shepherd. So the shepherd and the chapel are two buildings that go together. And here I feel like the game does a little bit of satire toward the chapel. So the chapel is a construction that you can make that has an action space on it. And when you use it, you can put a worker on that action space. And when you do so, you put a coin on the chapel. And then at the end of the game, each coin is a point. So you've now placed a point on the chapel. And each time that you put a worker on the chapel, you get another coin. Now, there's a limit to how many times you can do that, because once a worker is on there, it stays there till the end of the round, and there's only 4 rounds. So if you were to, in your very first turn, play a chapel and then use one of your round 1 workers to put something on the chapel, you could conceivably get 4 coins on there. Now, I'm not saying that would be a good plan. You only get 2 workers at the beginning of the game, so putting one of them on the chapel in your first round would be probably not the best use of your time. But I was able to get 3 coins on my chapel by building it in round 2, or round 3, excuse me. I guess you could get 4 coins. Yeah. I built it in round 3, and I put a worker on there to get 1 coin. And then I played a card that let me remove a worker from a place. So then I was able to put that worker back again and get a 2nd coin. And then in round 4, I put the worker there again and got a 3rd coin. So now I had a chapel with 3 coins on it. Now here's the part that felt a little bit like satire. The chapel allows you to get a shepherd for free, who's like the chaplain, right? The religious leader. And when you do that, you get 3 berries, and I think you give 3 berries to somebody else, but then you get as many coins on the shepherd as you had coins on the chapel. So there's this interesting element where the chapel raises money for you, and the shepherd raises more money for you. So and the game never has you do anything with that money. So the game has built in this narrative of the church earning money. Now, I will confess I did not look at it again. I can't remember if when you get the shepherd you give resources to somebody else or not. I think you do. So the shepherd does, give to the poor, but it earns you points, which is, the points are hard to come by. In the totality of the game, I had the scores were 50 to 60 to 65. So something that earns you 3 points is not nothing. So that was an interesting bit as well. Now, all of this reading may sound pretty critical. It's not necessarily meant to be. Like I said, I really enjoy Everdell, but I think there are interesting implications about the way society runs, or the way society should run, built into the mechanisms of the game. So it's interesting to think about what kind of world is Everdell describing to us as we build these tableaus. Maybe my final note here would be the rulers of the game. In Everdell, there are elements of civil society. There's a judge, there's a courthouse. I already mentioned the dungeon. But the leaders of Everdell are the king and the queen. Now, you can have both a king and a queen, but they are, estranged or something, because in order to get for free the king, you have to have the palace, the castle. To get the queen for free, you need a palace. You could have both the castle and the palace, but that would be very expensive and difficult to do. But it's interesting to me. Also, the king rewards, I think, unique critters, and the queen rewards you for having common critters. So then an interesting distinction in their concern for what's going on in the world. That's pretty fascinating to me. That's kind of the cultural elements I read in Everdell. What else did I miss? What's your favorite part of Everdell? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know in the comments. You can also email me, Brendan at Rattlebox Games, or send me a geek mail, Wombat929. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining me today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.